Hello, welcome to part two of this week's Talking Europe on France 24. We are back at the European Parliament in Brussels as MEPs ring in the new year. It is set to be an historic year for the European Union, losing a member for the first time in its history. But there's plenty else happening in the year of the Brexit, from climate goals to potential new members, foreign policy challenges that the EU may or may not be best equipped to tackle. We'll see what we can get through in the next 15 minutes or so. It's a bit of a challenge. Let's first introduce today's panel of MEPs. We are joined by, on my left, Matt Carthy, Irish MEP with Sinn Féin and the European United Left Group. Hello.
Hiya, Catherine.
Hello there.
Thanks for having me on.
On the other side of the table, we have Croatian MEP Željana Zovko. You're with the EPP Group, the centre-right group in Parliament. Hello.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Nice to have you with us. And we're welcoming back someone who's been on our show a few times before, Brando Benifei, Italian MEP from the Socialists and Democrats. Hi there.
Nice to see you. Hi.
Well, Happy New Year to everybody. Let's jump straight in. The year has started off with a real foreign policy bent to the news. We've, of course, got this very fast-moving tensions with Iran and the United States. The EU so far has been a bit on the sidelines, some would say, calling for diplomatic solutions. So first question, really, is the EU really a player in this situation?
We are assessing the situation, and the EU is a player, and it will show very soon that it is a player. It's a global player because the EU has to have a response, global response and multilateral response in a situation that presents the menace for the world peace.
I'm not sure I want the European Union to be a player in this instance. Absolutely, individual member states have important roles to play. I know each will have their own unique perspective to bring. From my country, which is a neutral country, I would argue that European countries that have that historic tradition of neutrality can play a positive role in trying to de-escalate. What we've seen over the past number of years is the European Union trying to assert itself in a military sense as opposed to a diplomatic sense, which I think is a worrying development. We've seen where this macho type of politics leads us. We've seen the escalation as a result of Trump's own domestic political agenda. He has potentially created a massive conflict that will have repercussions right across the world and that will lead to the result in countless thousands of innocent people being slaughtered. So I think what we need to do as political representatives at a European level is play whatever constructive role we can to try and de-escalate the situation.
Can the EU play?
I agree that we need to de-escalate, but also we need to have the strength to do that. We are now divided. The European Union has a lack of both diplomatic and military organization to act together in these kind of scenarios. Obviously, we want multilateralism and peace to be promoted, but we need to put our act together. We look divided. We look like we can only preach for these principles, but we are not taken seriously by the actors in the global stage today. I think that what has been happening in these weeks shows us that we need a new start for the so-called strategic autonomy of the European Union. Otherwise, we can only make declarations, but we will not be able to act either diplomatically or militarily.
Just
we are not
the problem with that, because the outflowing of it is that we should expand our military capacity, which of course is where European leaders want us to go. I think if any lesson has been, the European Commission has presented a draft budget that would see €13 billion being put into a new line of funding for a common defence fund. But who are we defending
There is
ourselves
no
from?
common foreign policy without a common defence.
Yes, and why do we need a common foreign policy? If you have a situation whereby you have some member states that are supporting Trump's war in the Middle East, and you have other member states that are militarily neutral. But that's not where the European Union interests lie. We know that. This is about a military agenda that has been driven largely by the arms industry. What we have learned, if anything, I hope, over the last decade or so, is that what the world needs least is another well-armed military machine.
Well, I'm sure this is a topic we'll come back to later in the year. I'm glad to get our debate off to such an energetic start. Let's move on to something else that's the cause of a lot of argument all around the continent, particularly in the UK. Brexit. The British parliamentary election in December, of course, put the UK on track to leave the EU by January 31st. Now, you might think the last 3.5 years since the referendum have been tricky enough, but we now have a period until December this year where the UK and the EU are going to be negotiating their future relationship. So let's take a listen right now to Boris Johnson speaking in Parliament about his intentions in late December.
The bill ensures that the implementation period must end on the 31st of December next year with no possibility of an extension. And it paves the way for a new agreement on our future relationship with our European neighbours based on an ambitious free trade agreement, with no alignment, with no alignment on EU rules, but instead control of our own laws. And close and friendly relations, Mr. Speaker.
Close and friendly relations, that sounds pretty good. But we've heard from Michel Barnier, for example, that he, who will be in charge of the negotiations of this next stage, does not think that a full deal is possible by the end of December, just a bare bones deal regarding quotas, tariffs, the basic building blocks. And this could be the moment, perhaps, when member states start arguing between themselves over their different interests. Zeliana Zovko, are you worried about the next stage of Brexit, or are you happy to be getting some clarity on the issue now that, Brexit is actually happening?
Yeah, I'm not happy that Brexit is happening because I spent my youth in London and I was educated there. I'm really unhappy that this had to happen. It's a very unfortunate situation for all the Europeans, but we will try, as the Croatian presidency is now took over, we will try to have Brexit done in the best possible manner to help Great Britain and as well to protect European interests.
Do you think that there could be these arguments that I mentioned? There are very different interests among different member states.
Absolutely, there are different interests, and we will try to reconcile, as a coordinator of the EU presidency, to reconcile all these interests and to play in the interest of European Union, but also to find a compromise with Great Britain, because this is a short time frame that we have in front of us, and I don't think that it will be very easy for Boris Johnson as well as a Prime Minister to carry out all these promises, but we will try to help from our side as well, from the side of European Parliament. I think that Michel Barnier has done an excellent work, and he will be the best person to execute it.
So hoping for smooth waters ahead. Matt Carthy, I know that your party, Sinn Féin, is actually looking for special status, for example, for Northern Irish citizens. Sounds like you could be getting a battle on your hands.
Yeah, I think people need to recognise that while some people might be relieved that, there's some form of clarity in relation to what's happening with Brexit, part of my country is being dragged out of the European Union against the democratically expressed wishes of the people who live there. Remember, under the Good Friday Agreement and therefore international law, people who live in the north of Ireland are entitled to Irish citizenship. That means that they're also European Union citizens, yet they won't have representation, for example, here in the European Parliament or in the other institutions. So there's going to be a democratic deficit immediately on the 1st of February, and it's my view that the European Union has a responsibility to try and address that. Certainly in the medium and long term, the solution to it is a united Ireland, and our hope is that people here in Europe will work with us to support us in achieving that end. But in the interim, we need to have the protections in place that protect the all-Ireland economy, that protect the peace process in Ireland, which is crucially important, but also that we protect the rights of citizens who live in that part of our country.
We heard clearly from these arguments on this topic that it will be complicated, and I see that there will be probably some contradictions between ambitions of this close and friendly relationship, as we heard from the Prime Minister, and the willingness to distance UK from the regulatory alignment. I think there will be issues to deal with, and I agree with Mr. Barnier that it will take some time, and probably we can only complete one stage. What is by the end of the year? What is very important is that we have clarity, because I was for remaining. I was against, I am against the leaving of the UK from the EU. I was an Erasmus student in London. I feel that the UK is part of the EU, but There has been finally a direction. Now we need more and more clarity, and we need cooperation between the parts to reach it.
OK, well, sticking with that theme of cooperation, moving on to our next topic, we are racing through them. Cooperation over climate change. Of course, those fires that we're seeing still ongoing in Australia have really brought people's focus back onto the issue of climate change, its role in wildfires, in floods, in all sorts of problems around the world. At the December EU summit, the member states agreed to a common goal of carbon neutrality in the EU by the year 2050, but Poland notably refused to commit to implementing that goal. So take a listen to the European Council President and the Polish Prime Minister.
We want Europe as the first climate-neutral continent. We took this decision with respect for many concerns of different countries, because we know that it is important to take into consideration the different national circumstances and also different starting points.
This was a very difficult negotiation. But the conclusions do include this exemption, that Poland would be reaching climate neutrality at its own pace. A rule that must also be included in the legislative process.
So one question that arises out of all of this, the EU meant to be working on a principle of unanimity over this. Of course, climate change affecting the whole continent in different ways, but pretty much equally. If Poland is already getting a bit of an exemption on this right from the get-go, what kind of future does this policy really have? Is it all going to fall apart?
I think there's a lot of hypocrisies and a lot of contradictions in terms of the position of political leaders, including at an EU level. So, for example, we're listening to very strong language from European leaders, yet at the same time this year they expect us to ratify a trade deal with Mercosur that runs contrary to every principle of climate action. So I think what we've seen in relation to the Polish government's position is the first exposure of those contradictions. But if we're serious about tackling climate action, then we need to be really serious about those issues, and that has to cut across every other policy area, including trade policy, and it needs to have at its centre the notion of a just transition, because some communities are going to be more affected by this than others, and they need support.
Poland arguing that because of its history, because of its coal-fired power stations and where it's come from historically and economically, Poland saying, look, we need more time, we need more money. The Netherlands, though, for example, saying Poland shouldn't be getting any more money. They should just sign up like everybody else.
I think we should also combine different interests and different levels of development from the east and west and from the north and south. And we should take into account, as a part of the European Union, we should take into account and listen to everybody's concerns and desires and the developed regions, industries. It's not the same way that we have developed our countries. And the goals should be adjusted to everybody's needs, because what we want is developed European Union that every citizen lives in the same way and has the same...
climate change doesn't respect the same calendars.
And it doesn't respect borders. The climate change is really a European or even global issue. And so I think that this is just a political game. There will be no possibility for real for Poland to be out of it. Those
economic disparities are real, though, aren't they? Economic disparities are real.
Yeah, they are real, but they are not only in Poland. And so I think that we will need to find comprehensive policies so that the climate change fight, the big transition, is not paid by those who always paid. Workers, poor people, vulnerable groups and territories. We need to put real policies, which means money, which means decisions to ask the polluters to pay. This will be tough, but I think this is the real battle, because today everyone seems to agree, but they are not agreeing, and we will see it, and we will have to fight because there are different views.
Jana Zovko wants to come back in, I think.
Yeah, I think we will have a conference on future of Europe where we will address the concerns of our citizens and to see what really citizens think about all these issues.
Is it what the citizens think, though, or is it what the climate scientists?
But we should, we are representing citizens. We are here elected by our citizens, by our voters, and we should address the concerns of our voters first.
Yeah.
And this is something, this is not ideal world. It's not a la-la land.
One last thing,
Luckily, a lot of people realize that they are dying because of...
Of course, we need to take the advice and the guidance that the scientific evidence is providing us. And we know that there is a big job of work to be done. The question is going to be, who's going to pay for it? And up until this point, the answer has been that ordinary people, ordinary citizens, ordinary workers, ordinary communities should pay the price, even though they weren't the people who caused the crisis that we're in. It was those global corporations primarily, and they need to be asked
because
to
of
pay
all
their
these
price.
undeveloped, because of these concerns. We have all these issues that are threatening security of European Union, and we have to address the concerns of the citizens. Citizens have to stay, have to have their works. We cannot influence the closure of their factories where they are living, and it's something that we should, this should come first.
But up until now, it has been citizens who've been asked to pay carbon taxes rather than the polluters. That needs to be turned on its head.
OK,
I
there's like
agree.
a serious bit of thinking and arguing about the approach to climate change has clearly just not left us. I just wanted to have a last very quick word about the issue of EU enlargement. We're going to talk about it a lot this year. 2 Western Balkan countries, North Macedonia and Albania, were due to start accession last year. That didn't happen. Really, if you can, just in one word, do you believe that North Macedonia and Albania should start the process of joining the EU?
If that's the democratic will of the people who live there, then yes. But the EU needs to reform in order to respect all national democracies within our union.
Absolutely, yes. We were, on behalf of Parliament, we negotiated resolution where we strongly opposed the decision of the Council. It was a mistake, a big, huge mistake, and President Macron is now revising this approach together with Croatian presidency in order to put this up on the agenda. It will be on the agenda of Croatian presidency as a strategic
massive issue for
stability.
Croatia.
I agree with my colleagues. It's very important, and we have a clear position by the Parliament. This doesn't hinder the possibility that it's needed to reform the European Union. We can go at the same pace, enlargement and reform.
OK, thank you all so much for this very quick look ahead at 2020. Matt Carthy, Brenda Benifei and Juliana Zovko, thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thanks to you as well. See you soon on France 24.
The world is ever changing. The news doesn't wait. That's why at France 24, we'll always be there to help make sense of world events. For the best international coverage, 24 hours a day, no matter what, France 24 is with you everywhere, all the time.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.
Until recently considered one of the jewels of Iraq, Mosul became a ghost town when Islamic State jihadists imposed a reign of terror in 2014.
يعني شاف داعش وشاف الذبح قدامه وشاف القتل وشاف السلب فجيل راح يطلع جيل ايش يعني اوصف لك اياه يعني جيل ما اعتقد جيل محب للسلام راح يطلع.
3 years later, the coalition freed Mosul after 9 months of intensive bombardment. Today, the city is in ruins. The authorities are rebuilding its infrastructure and keeping a close eye on the sermons of its imams. In this edition of Revisited, find out how the inhabitants of Mosul are learning to live again while trying to forget the horrors of the Islamic State. Revisited, presented by Stuart Norval on France 24 and France24.com.